Good afternoon to Chairs Joan Sawyer and Vonta and all the other esteemed members of this important committee. One, thank you for the opportunity to testify on these incredibly important matters. I think you've heard a lot today. It's been an incredible testimony all day today. I will attempt to be short. As this panel is talking about the future and what we should do, I do want to just give a number of recommendations. My name is David Mohammed. I've been a correctional administrator in Washington, D.C., New York, and here in Alameda County in California. I'm currently with an organization called Impact Justice. I work on numerous initiatives throughout the state and outside of the state to reform the juvenile and the criminal justice system. The three kind of buckets of recommendations I want to talk about first is reducing the criminal and juvenile justice system and improving it. Secondly, reinvesting the savings created by the reduction into the communities most impacted by poverty and crime. And third, quality implementation of reform. And so around further reductions, one, there has been incredible reductions in particularly the juvenile justice system that we should both celebrate but also not rest on our laurels about. But there's a lot more that we can do to reduce the system with so many young people unnecessarily in it. One thing is reduce the length of time youth are on probation to 1 year. Even Texas limits it to 1 year. In most counties in California, you can come on at 14, have no violations, no new arrests, and not get off until 19. A waste of money and a unnecessary use of government resources and a necessary intrusion into those young people's lives. On the adult side as well, although most counties limit the time adults are on probation to 3 years, there are a couple of counties like Sacramento and Alameda that have it for research shown unnecessarily and ineffective and wasteful 5 years. Also, we should use incentive funding to say across the board use valid risk assessments on the principle that incarceration, especially for young people, is ineffective, harmful, and excessively expensive. And I think all the science and research shows that. Then we should only be incarcerating people that we think are actual risks to the public safety at that moment, and that's a small number of people versus who's currently incarcerated. And if we use some valid risk assessments, there's a lot of challenges with risk assessment, but at least if we get to the point where funding is incentivizing jurisdictions to use valid risk assessments and only use incarceration for those who are assessed at high risk, then we would significantly reduce the number of people currently incarcerated. Also, we need to have more diversion and alternative programs, especially for those with mental health challenges. And we have to increase the in-custody program. We should first and primarily have as a goal reduction of the system, reduce the number of people in the system. But for those who remain, the quality of programming inside must vastly improve. It is pathetic, quite honestly, the lack of rehabilitation, education, and treatment programs that we offer people in custody, and then release them expecting them to somehow have been reformed miraculously. Second, reinvest the savings that we create by smaller system back into the community. There have been enormous reductions in California. The state juvenile justice system has reduced by 90% in the last 15 years. In '97, we had 10,000 young people incarcerated in the California Youth Authority. Today, there's less than 700 in the Department of Juvenile Justice. It's astronomical. Also, if you take the total rated capacity of all of the juvenile facilities, every county juvenile facility throughout the state, the population is only at 50% of that capacity. Incredible reductions. In fact, as was noted earlier, the juvenile delinquency rate is currently the lowest it has ever been in history in California. Now, you wouldn't think that if you opened a newspaper or turned on a television news, but it's the lowest that it's ever been. Those savings that have been created, we have not even come close to putting an adequate percentage of those savings back into the communities that many of those young people and those families come from. A great example of a model of reinvestment is Proposition 47, while also recently has been a poor example of the actual implementation. We were disappointed that the amount that's going to be given back to the community and services was so small with the projections this year, and so much, as often happens in many so-called investment initiatives, are just reinvested back into the very systems. So taking money from a prison and giving it to probation is not justice reinvestment. And that's what happens over and over and over again. I will say that we should be okay with probation officers having smaller caseloads. I will say that on behalf and in defense of probation officers. I've heard stories around the state of them having to pad their caseloads because the numbers are so low. No. It's great for you to have 10 or 15 youth on your caseload. That's what we want. We don't want you padding your caseload with people who should not be on probation. Another good example that I won't go into detail with is the Title IV-E waiver, right? So Title IV-E is federal dollars for out-of-home placements, for foster care placements. We generally only think about it on the child welfare side, but a good part of it is on the probation side as well. And those counties like LA and Alameda and a few others now, including Sacramento, which have the waiver, can use those same dollars. Instead of mandated to send a youth out of the home, they can keep a young person in the home and help the family. But we have to use those funds appropriately. Last, quality implementation. Speaking of using those funds appropriately, you've heard a couple of times the LA probation audit that revealed approximately $161 million of unspent community funds, which is really, we should be embarrassed as a society around that. But if you looked in every department, everywhere, that number would just balloon. It might be most extreme, LA probation, but it exists in many, many agencies and jurisdictions around the state. Many of the incredible pieces of legislation and propositions passed in the past few years, which are great, require a level of implementation. SB 9, which for the most part eliminated life without the possibility of parole for juveniles. SB 260 and 261, which taken together says youth convicted prior to their 23rd birthday can have an earlier parole date, and if they've shown rehabilitation, and they must give great weight to the fact that they were children when they committed their offense. AB 109, realignment, Prop 36, which amended 3 strikes, and Proposition 47, all of them. 47 has the most automatic trigger around release from prison, but all of them require some form of court filing, advocacy, follow-up. And while these are incredibly wonderful legislation and propositions, the follow-up and the implementation in every one of them has been problematic. And we need much better implementation over these. The last thing I'll say is data, 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 data. Just as embarrassing as it is at $161 million when unspent in LA is how little, if nothing, we require jurisdictions to report on outcomes, what they're doing. We don't have simply what's the recidivism rate of every county in the state of California. Just that basic level of information we do not know, right? Let alone how many people what's their education outcomes, what's their employment rate, what's going on with them, or what has happened to them. When a youth gets charged as an adult, what has been their number of arrests or adjudications that they've had previously. We don't collect that. We don't publish that information. California has been known around the country as being somewhat, quite honestly, a laughingstock around the issue of data. We don't have a central place where we're collecting and publishing, because there's actually a lot of places that collect the data. It's just not shared. It's just not published. And so we need to have some baseline of this amount of data needs to be collected and published. And so of these recommendations of shrinking the size of the system, as we have been doing, I saw one report that said if the prison system today was as big as it was the last time the crime rate was this way, we would have about a 70% reduction in the prison system, right? Because thankfully our crime rate is so low while we have had significant reductions in incarceration. And so with that, thank you for the time.